Well, good afternoon and welcome to all of you that are here at the Family Research Council with us today for a lecture by Dr. Gorka. Thanks to all of you who are online. And this should be an exciting day. I think we've got some people that signed up that aren't here yet, but as you look outside, you will see that there are 4 buses parked in front of our headquarters here, and they got streets closed off all over, so I think people are having a little trouble getting in. But welcome to those of you who did make it here. I don't want to waste a lot of time with introductions here. If you don't know who Dr. Sebastian Gorka is, and by the way, he has his wife here, Katie Gorka, and she's certainly much more pleasant to look at than Sebastian, but thank you, Katie, for being here. And let me say up front, at the end of this, Dr. Gorka and Katie will be selling copies of his book, and I got the first one here today, Defeating Jihad. And I would say to all of you who are concerned about what's happening in this country, you need to have this book. It's a relatively small book. By the way, it is a New York Times bestseller right now. So get it. Dr. Gorka will sign the book for you and make sure that you don't leave without your copy. You know, Dr. Gorka is an interesting character in that he's done a little bit of everything. But you will notice when he begins to talk, if you haven't heard him on Fox or CNN or any of the other news channels, and I asked him earlier, you know, do you still have a day job? You seem to be on the media every day, and so I don't know when you sleep because I've caught you a couple of times very late at night, but he actually does have a day job. And right now, Dr. Gorka, who was born in England to parents that escaped from Hungary during what we would call the Cold War now, and during the occupation by the Russians and part of the Soviet Union. His parents escaped, came to Britain, and he was born in Britain. Ultimately, he was educated in Britain and then went back and got a second part of his education back in Hungary. Today, he holds the Major General Matthew C. Horner Distinguished Chair of Military Theory at Marine Corps University. As chairman of the Threat Knowledge Group, he also provides training and expertise to the law enforcement, military, and the intelligence communities. And remember, the intelligence community is 16, depending on how you count it, 17 different organizations that make up the intelligence community. So he has a very broad reach within the intelligence community. They seek his advice and counsel regularly. In 2012, he was awarded the Joint Civilian Service Commendation by the United States Special Operations Command in Tampa, Florida, which is the command under which I spent much of my 36 years. Again, he was born in the United Kingdom, grew up there, speaks like a Brit, and you'll notice that today, but he was also in what they call a territorial army regiment, working in intelligence and security in the British Army. He is now a U.S. citizen, became a U.S. citizen in 2012, I believe, right? So, yeah. And most recently, he has served as an expert witness in the Boston Marathon bombing trial. He appears frequently in the international media, including BBC, and our media, Fox, Sky News, CNN, and Breitbart, and has briefed the CIA, FBI, DIA, and the Navy SEALs. And I guess as we look for experts on this issue of jihad and what's happening in America and what we need to do as a nation to counter the threats to this nation, there's not a better expert on this issue. I think you'll find his comments enlightening and fascinating. So Dr. Gorka, help me welcome Dr. Gorka here.
Thank you, sir. I must say it is an absolute honor to be speaking here at FRC, and especially to be introduced by not only a former commander at Bragg, but also a legend in the Tier 1 special operations community. So thank you, General Boykin. What I'd like to do today is very briefly talk about why I wrote my book, Defeating Jihad, what is in the book, and then I think of perhaps greatest interest to all of you are the studies, the research that we've done at my company with my wife Katie on what is the ISIS threat to America. Not the theory, not the what if, but what are the tangible facts of what the ISIS threat represents after San Bernardino, after Paris, after Brussels, and after yesterday's events in Turkey. But let me begin with a story. I am an American now, a proud American, and my wife, when I sat down to write this book, I was going to just dive in as a typical Washington wonk and just write about national security and jihadis. And she said, no, you don't sell books like that. Americans like a story, and you have to connect with your audience. And my, was she right? Because I opened my book with a personal story, and it's the only thing people talk about after they read the book. So what is that story? It's a story of a 15-year-old young boy in Budapest, Hungary, in 1945, who in the preceding 5 years has seen his homeland devastated by World War II. Budapest, if you're not a historian, the Budapest siege was the longest siege of World War II. Most people think it was Leningrad. It was, in fact, the Budapest siege. 3 out of 5 buildings were destroyed in the capital city of Hungary. And this young boy, after the war ends, has some hope that the country can be restored, that can find its independence once more. And his real hope are the requirements of the Yalta Treaty. That treaty signed between Stalin and the Allies on what would be the fate of Central Europe after the hostilities ceased. And this treaty guaranteed things such as free and democratic elections. However, over the next 3 years, this young man called Paul saw his country gradually be gobbled up, devoured by a communist dictatorship that was being puppeteered out of Kremlin, out of Moscow and the Kremlin. One after another, Democrats, patriots were intimidated, kidnapped, tortured, or murdered. So by the time he reaches the age of majority and starts college, he says enough is enough, and he decides to push back. In the interests of a free and independent Hungary, he creates in college a secret organization of patriotic Christians, young students who are going to collect sensitive information about the Soviet occupational forces, troop deployments, what the Soviets are doing, and somehow spirit that information out to the West so that the Allies can stop the communist takeover. They were successful. For over half a year, they managed to collect sensitive information, and like an old James Bond movie, they would write letters, innocuous letters to friends in the West, and in between the lines of the letters, using invisible ink, they'd list all the sensitive information about what the communists were doing. Unfortunately, this information, which did make it out to the West, finally landed at MI6, the British External Security or Intelligence Service. And the reports eventually landed on the desk of none other than Kim Philby. Now, everybody in this room, or most of the people in this room, are too young to have lived through the Cold War. Kim Philby was one of the 5 Cambridge apostles, the deadliest traitors to Western civilization during the Cold War, ensconced inside the British intelligence and policy establishment. So what did Philby do? He ran my father's organization for a few more months, and then he betrayed them and blew the whole group to the KGB and the Hungarian secret police. As a result, at the age of 20, Paul was arrested, tortured, and given a life sentence. That man was my father. After 6 years in prison, 2 years in solitary, 2 years down a prison coal mine, he was finally liberated during the revolution of 1956, when a tank captured by the freedom fighters broke down the front gates of the prison and released all those people who had been imprisoned simply for resisting communism. As a result, my father and the daughter of another prison mate, a young girl called Susan, a 17-year-old young Hungarian girl, escaped through the minefields, avoiding the Soviet police, and ended up in Austria as refugees from communism. That woman would become my father's wife and my mother, and they eventually ended up in the UK, where I was born and raised. Now, what on earth has that to do with a book entitled Defeating Jihad? It's my point of reference. Why? Because unlike some of my fellow Americans, I had a different lens through which I understood the events of 15 years ago on that beautiful cloudless Tuesday morning in Manhattan. I was raised, inculcated in my blood, with the understanding that freedom and liberty is as fragile as it is precious. That sooner or later there will be another organized group of individuals who will subvert, sabotage, and finally wish to destroy and take away your freedoms. They can be Nazis, fascists, or communists, but 15 years ago, they were jihadis. When those two planes hit the World Trade Center, the Pentagon afterwards, and then that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, for me, it was not just terrorism, it was the return of the totalitarians. Because there is a common thread between Hitler, Stalin, Bin Laden, Abu Bakr, Omar Mateen from Orlando, and those 3 suicide bombers yesterday in Istanbul. The thread is that they will brook no compromise. There is no coexistence with these individuals. Either they will enslave or crush us, or we will crush them. The global jihadi movement is simply a new form of totalitarianism. And as such, I wrote this book because I am angry. I am fed up. America is the greatest nation on God's earth. It is also the most powerful nation the world has ever seen. Yet, we are losing this war. Snapshot from around the world. Just some pictures about what we need to appreciate about the strategic context. Whether it's on the streets of London, where 2 jihadis behead a British serviceman, whether it's one of our allies, a Jordanian fighter pilot, burnt alive at the hands of ISIS, whether it's a nightclub in Orlando with 49 Americans slain like sheep, or whether it's a Christmas party in San Bernardino where this man and his wife kill their fellow workers, or a rock concert in Paris that jihadis destroy and treat as a slaughterhouse, or last night, the 3rd biggest airport in Europe, which has seen at least 41 people dead, 10 of them probably foreigners and not Turks. This is the threat environment. And in the last 15 years, America has been losing. And there is no excuse for our losing, given who we are. It is no accident that in the 20th century, the 2 most dangerous totalitarianisms, fascism and communism, were only destroyed through the offices of the United States. The totalitarians are back, and it will take us again to lead the fight against these new totalitarians. But instead of winning this war, what has happened? We have a political elite, we have an administration that says we're not at war, doesn't treat it as war. After 49 Americans are slaughtered, says it's a hate crime and it probably has something to do with a man's repressed homosexual identity. We're not going to win the war if we don't understand what the threat is. In the last 7 years, we've seen a systematic suppression and censorship of what you're allowed to say about the enemy that we face. What Attorney General Lynch did last week isn't an anomaly. It's not a one-off. It is simply a cabinet-level example of the egregious censorship that our warfighters, our law enforcement officers, and our intelligence analysts have had to live with since the Obama administration took office. This is not my opinion or spin. You can Google it. 6 years ago, the White House issued an unclassified memorandum to the then Attorney General and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, which stipulated all counterterrorism training in America must be scrubbed. There must be no mention of Islam, and words like jihad are verboten, are prohibited. That's like trying to defeat Hitler and telling our troops, whatever you do, don't mention the word Nazi, because you could offend a German. It's like an SNL skit, isn't it? It's absurd. It's Monty Python-esque. But that's where we are today. It's like a patient walking into a hospital with stage 3 cancer, and the doctor says, no, that's not cancer. You've got the cold. Take some aspirins, go home and hydrate. What would happen to that patient? They die. We are not permitted to correctly diagnose the threat, and that is why we have the absurdity after Orlando of a cabinet member saying, we will win by loving them. No, you won't, because it wouldn't have worked with Hitler, and it wouldn't have worked with Stalin, and it won't work with the people who executed the attacks in Istanbul, San Bernardino, or Boston. So what's the answer? Well, my book's outside, but let me give you the teaser. The teaser is a very simple answer. 3 things, just 3 things to win this war. Number 1, we must jettison political correctness. We are absolutely beyond inserting politics into the threat assessment. The threat assessment of any threat, be it Hitler, the Soviet Union, North Korea, China, or jihad, cannot be politically driven or driven to meet political expectations. It is based upon the analysis of raw intelligence data. The idea that certain things must be whited out because they don't fit a White House narrative is where defeat begins. As a student of mine at National Defense University put it, I won't mention his name, but he knows who he is if he's watching. In his MA dissertation, he wrote the following: if the enemy controls what you are allowed to say about them, you have already lost the war. Absolutely correct. That has to stop. Politics must be removed, and we must talk honestly about the enemy as they talk about themselves. When they say we are jihadis doing this for Allah, you don't get to delete that from the transcript, General Lynch. You don't get to say, no, they're not jihadis, they're just poorly educated, unemployed individuals. Wrong. Treat the enemy in a way that reflects the reality of who they are. Second, we must empower our allies who must be the face of this war. America is the crucial ingredient in defeating the jihadis, but we should not be the face of this war. White-skinned, brown-skinned, yellow-skinned Americans should not be the face of the war against ISIS or Al-Qaeda. It should be our Sunni allies, people like the Jordanians, people like the Egyptians, the people who are actually being killed the most. Let's be clear here. This is not a war with Islam. Why? Who are the majority of the victims of the jihadis? They'll execute Christians, they'll behead Yazidis, but by far the greatest victims are Sunni Muslims who disagree with them, such as Lieutenant Qasas Bey of the Hashemite Air Force of Jordan. This is a war inside Islam, leveraging a very powerful 7th century fundamental version of the religion that is in the Quran. I'm sorry, whether you like it or not, the second half, the Medinan passages of the Quran are kinetic and they are martial. Chapter 9, verse 29. Don't take my word for it. Read it. It's the word of Allah, allegedly. Chapter 9, verse 5. Hunt down the infidel, besiege them with every stratagem of war, and unless they convert, kill them. I'm not sure how you pass that. I'm not sure how love works with that. We have to empower people like President Sisi of Egypt, who has admitted at the epicenter of Sunni Islam, the Al-Azhar in Cairo 2 years ago, on New Year's Day, he has said to the most powerful clerics of Sunni Islam, you must help me initiate a religious revolution because the jihadis are winning. If the duly elected president of the most populous Arab nation in the world understands this is a religious war, I think we should probably give him the credit and recognition. He probably knows a lot better than we do. I have met him. He is a devout Muslim. He understands the stakes and the religious nature of our enemy. Lastly, and this is really a function of my heritage and growing up in the Cold War, ultimate victory against groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, or even Hezbollah will not come in the kinetic domain. Don't get me wrong, I served in a CT unit. I have nothing against killing terrorists. I'm very down with killing terrorists, okay? But the idea today, such as JSOC has, and JSOC is very good at this. We can, the phrase I heard recently at a military meeting is, we can stack them like cordwood. Yeah, we can. If we locate the enemy, we can kill them usually within 72 hours of their being located. But killing bad guys and counting body bags was a bad metric of success during the Vietnam War, and nothing's changed. Because you can deploy a UAV or an ODA, a Special Forces detachment, and kill a leading jihadi, but if in the next 24 hours 15 individuals volunteer to replace him, what has that UAV become? What has that Special Missions Unit operation become? A recruiting vehicle for the enemy. They will always find new recruits, and we are in a vicious cycle of whack-a-mole. The last 15 years is really a vicious cycle of whack-a-mole. So how do we win? As Sun Tzu said, war isn't about killing enemy units. War is about destroying the enemy's strategy. And he was right 3,000 years ago, and he's right today. We have to stop people wanting to become jihadis. How do we do that? Not with more community outreach and basketball matches, yeah? We do that by delegitimizing their message of holy war. This is what is seductive. In the postmodern secular world, young men and women have been denuded of purpose, yes? In an age of, hookups, Tinder, video games, mindless, empty existence. An imam, a relative, can come along and say, do you want purpose in your life? I'll give you meaning. How about being a holy warrior for God? Wow, there's not much to compete with that in modern day, yeah? So we have to destroy that narrative. We have to destroy the brand of jihad, just the same way during the Cold War under President Reagan's leadership, we destroyed the brand of communism. We shone a light on the truth of it, on its internal corruption, and we made it look bankrupt both fiscally but also morally, and therefore it crumbled. And the way for us to do that is with a giant counter-propaganda campaign in the open and in the black domain, and also through our Sunni allies. It is absolutely shocking that in the last 15 years we have basically not practiced psychological warfare. Whenever we do psychological operations or information operations, it is almost exclusively at a pointless tactical level. It is not at the national level. We have had nothing like President Reagan's speech at the Brandenburg Gate, where he said in 1987, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now think about the power of that one sentence, which most people don't realize. The State Department flunkies tried 6 times to delete from the president's speech. 6 times. On the way to the event, President Reagan finally was forced by hand to reinsert that sentence. And you can read the original script at the Reagan Library. That sentence was amazing because what did it say? It was a message to all the captive people behind the Iron Curtain. Your leaders built a wall. For what purpose? Not to protect you from us, but to stop you from accessing your freedom. to prevent you from being free human beings. That's psychological warfare. That's how you destroy a brand, and we haven't done so in the last 15 years, and it would be nice to start. So, number one, get politics out of the threat assessment. Number two, empower our Sunni allies. And number three, have a gargantuan white and black counter-propaganda campaign that will destroy the brand of jihad. That's the teaser, but it's much more exciting if you buy the book. Okay, last thing I'd like to do is I'd like to share you the work my wife and I have been doing through our company Threat Knowledge Group. That is an analysis of what ISIS is doing in America. We wrote this report. You will get our URL in my email at the end. If you want access to this report, it's unclassified and we will send you a copy. We wrote this report last year for a very specific reason. We were getting contradictory reports from inside government as to whether or not ISIS is a problem in America. Some people were saying, no, no problem, you know, these are not the droids you're looking for, it's not a problem, okay? And other people we trusted were informally telling us, it's a real problem. So what did we do? We sat down for 3 months and we collected all the unclassified information on ISIS, we identified the trends and we put them into one report, and it is not a positive picture. So this is the report, it's called ISIS, the Threat to the United States. It's a short report. You'll find it on our website, but we can send it to you as I said. Before I talk about our findings, let me zoom out for a moment and show you a graph from a report that was published at the same time from Duke University that really gives you the extent of the problem. Every year, Duke publishes a very politically correct titled report called Muslim American Involvement in Violent Extremism. Okay? It doesn't use the word jihad, uses the government's preferred violent extremism phrase. And basically it's a collation of everything jihadi, every terrorist plot in America in the prior 12 years. You can download the report online, it's about 20 pages long. But I just want to share with you this first graph, because this should make every American wake up and sit up straight. This first graph is a summary of every jihadi plot in America in the last 15 years. So this is ISIS, Al-Qaeda, homegrown, whatever, okay? And it confirms everything that we had been told by our sources in the FBI. 2015, last year, saw the highest instance of jihadi plots on US soil since September the 11th, by far. Usually multiples of previous years. And note, 2015 is the year that 24 hours before the San Bernardino attack, Secretary Kerry and the Commander-in-Chief stated what? ISIS is contained and we are winning. That is hours before the second greatest attack on US soil since September the 11th until, of course, Orlando. So the trend line is not a JV team, they are not contained, and we are not winning. Let's look at ISIS specifically, because our report is about ISIS. This is a map of all ISIS incidents in the last 2 years since Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared the caliphate. As you can see, it is everywhere. It is not geographically constricted to any specific part of America. If you include the Orlando attack, please bear with me, Omar Mateen is the 103rd ISIS suspect killed or captured on US territory since the caliphate was declared 2 years ago. Not the third, not the 33rd, the 103rd ISIS suspect. Here's the really bad news. If you break down the arrests and the killings of people we've neutralized on US soil into who they are and what they were doing, this is the breakdown. Half of them are what the Bureau, the FBI, euphemistically calls travelers. Yes? I love that phrase. It sounds as if they're going on holiday to Paris. Travelers. It's Americans or American subjects that have decided to fight jihad, but fight jihad in the Middle East. They've sworn bayat to Abu Bakr and to ISIS, and they want to travel through Turkey most often into Iraq and Syria to live the life of jihadi. So they're not a threat to us here, they're leaving US territory. About 20% are the management level terrorists, recruiters, talent spotters, individuals that identify the jihadis and facilitate their recruitment, buy them that plane ticket to the Middle East. But 33.3%, exactly a third, of all ISIS suspects we have intercepted have decided to be jihadis, but have also decided they're not going anywhere. They have sworn bayat, allegiance to the new caliph, the new emperor of Islam, and they have committed themselves that the best way to be a jihadi is to kill American infidels on US soil. That is why we concluded our report that given this very high percentage of domestically oriented jihadis, a Paris-style attack on US soil is not a question of if, it is a question of when. And we published that report 1 week before the San Bernardino attack. And since then, we've of course had Orlando as well. So to conclude, what are the three take-homes? What's the essential take-homes? Number one, the threat is real, ladies and gentlemen, and it is here. It's not something happening 8,000 miles away in Mesopotamia or in an airport in Brussels. It is right here on your doorstep. 4 weeks ago, I got a tip from somebody inside a certain unit in New York, and he said, watch the news early tomorrow morning. And I did. And what happens? At 4 a.m., the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the FBI and the NYPD arrested a member of ISIS who was not only recruiting people to fight in the Middle East, but was assisting terrorist plots in America. That man was arrested in the heart of the Bronx. That news item died less than 24 hours later. We arrest an ISIS member in the Bronx. Who cares? That's very disturbing that nobody is really interested. Second, whether our political masters like it or not, the enemy is motivated by a religious narrative. It doesn't matter whether you see yourself as a very modern, sophisticated, secular individual. The enemy doesn't care. If you think church or temple is a really good networking exercise and they've got good donuts, yes, the enemy looks at religion a little bit differently. And this is one of our biggest problems. We have an elite that doesn't understand faith. They don't understand how powerful religion can be. And as a result, they deny its relevance. But we deny it at our peril. Our enemy is committed, and they are doing this for their God. And as soon as we understand that, the sooner we will be able to understand what they do, how they do it, and how to defeat them. Lastly, self-censoring any of the above truths simply endangers you, the American citizen, our operators, and our warfighters, and will prolong this war. If we continue to white out the reality, the motivations of people like Omar Mateen, the Tsarnaev brothers, Major Nidal Hassan, we will not win this war, and we will be in a deadly cycle. Your children, my grandchildren, will be fighting this war. If you wish further information or any of our reports, if you have a question you'd like to ask privately, best way to contact me is at my Gmail, seb.gorka@gmail.com. My Twitter handle is sebgorka without the dot, just S-E-B, Seb Gorka. Everything I do for public consumption is on my personal site, thegorkabriefing.com, all my media, all my analysis. There's actually, if today hasn't depressed you enough, there's a 12-part video lecture on ISIS, so where ISIS came from. So there's actually a video lecture available there. Everything we do for the warfighter, for the FBI, for the intelligence community is through our commercial site, threatknowledge.org. You can actually directly download our ISIS papers from Threat Knowledge. And then lastly, my wife has a 501c3. She's the president on the Council on Global Security, and that site monitors developments in the jihadi ideology. So what's happening in the various regions of the world of greatest concern, and specifically how our fellow Christians, our brothers and sisters, are suffering in those areas where the Islamists are gaining power. So if you wish to support a cause that helps lobby and support the interests of our brothers and sisters in the Middle East and find out what the jihadis are doing, you may wish to bookmark councilonglobalsecurity.org. Okay, sir, that's my brief. If we have questions, I'd be glad to
take a few questions, and I'm going to ask you if you ask the question, where's the mic? Yeah. If you ask the question, use the mic so that the people that are online can hear it. Let me have the mic, because I'm going to start it with the first question. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Gorka, let me start with the first question, and that is, as we go back to the 2008 Holy Land Foundation trial, we know that there are Muslim Brotherhood front groups operating in America, close to 300 of them, that were identified in that trial. At the top of the list is the Council of American Islamic Relations, and then the Islamic Society of North America, Islamic Trust of North America. What's the relationship between those entities and ISIS, if you can make a connection?
Okay, so if there were a direct operational relation that was known, then those organizations could be prosecuted today for being FTOs, connected to foreign terrorist organizations, and material terrorist support could be a charge leveled against them. They're a little bit smarter than that. Of course, CARE, ISNA, ICNA were all listed as unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest threat financing trial, terrorist financing trial in U.S. history. $12 million raised on U.S. soil to go to the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist organization Hamas. So it's in a federal document. They have been listed. The real connection is a genetic connection. And this is something that isn't well understood. Every terrorist group today that says they're jihadis, it doesn't matter whether it's Abu Sayyaf, it doesn't matter whether it's the Islamic Courts Union of Somalia, Al-Qaeda, doesn't matter who they are, Al-Nusra, they all can be traced back in their ideological roots to the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the grandfather of modern jihad. Anybody who tells you any different, anybody tells you the Muslim Brotherhood are just a bunch of frustrated Jeffersonian Democrats, either that person is a clinical moron, okay, or they're part of the Brotherhood. Those are your two scenarios. Idiot, bad guy, okay? Because the Muslim Brotherhood was created just 4 years after Kemal Atatürk, the first president, prime minister of modern Turkey, dissolved the caliphate. This is why history matters. The caliphate, the Islamic Empire, existed for more than 1,000 years. Because it put its money on the wrong horse during World War I, it was dissolved by the first president of Turkey, so he could join the West. But in a response, the fundamentalists who cried foul, who said Atatürk had no authority to do this, created the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood's mission for the last 90 years is to re-establish the caliphate for the greater glory of Allah. This is exactly what Mohammed Morsi was trying to do after he won the elections in Egypt. All the modern jihadi organizations, from Al-Qaeda to Egyptian Islamic Jihad, to Hizb ut-Tahrir, to Al-Qaeda, to ISIS, can trace their lineage ideologically back to the Brotherhood. And if I can close the circle on all of this, think about what the AG redacted or attempted to redact from the transcripts that Omar Mateen made to the dispatcher. He said, the important things they cut out were that I am a jihadi doing this for the Islamic State, for the caliphate. I mean, if that doesn't tell you how important history is, nothing will. an American is slaying fellow Americans in a nightclub in Orlando. 49 people he's slaying. And he stops to make a phone call so that we understand what he is doing. He is doing in the name of the empire that was dissolved 90 years ago and which has been re-established just 24 months ago in Mosul. This is the significance of ISIS. And to answer your question, sir, the enemy knows there's more than one way to skin a cat. You can kill a person, crucify them, blow them up, decapitate them, or you can subvert their culture. The Soviets knew this. It's much better, yes? I mean, I'm sorry I have to do this again, a bit of a strategy wonk. Sun Tzu is the master. Sun Tzu said the ultimate form of victory is what? Winning without fighting. To achieve your goal, to bend the will of the enemy without pulling a trigger. The Muslim Brotherhood, care, isna, ikna. They understand that very well.
Religious liberty issues. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the tension. It seems that this is another area in which we have to deal with this, and we can see others throughout the last 100 and perhaps more years, on the tension between the balance between security and liberty, especially as it concerns the United States. I mean, this has sort of been a discussion over the last 15 years, but with regard to individual rights, protection of individual rights, which you hear voiced from many communities on this issue, and then obviously security, and how to frame that and think about that as we approach the issue, as Americans approach the issue. Just any comments on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, well, the first thing is be very, very leery of anybody who says, I've got the right formula for that, because they've probably got a bridge to sell you as well, okay? There is no formula for the balance between security and liberty. The Founding Fathers knew very well it is a constant balance. It is something that must be fought for. Look at what happened during World War I, World War II. These things are not carved in stone. What I would say to the current context is it has been misrepresented and misunderstood. One example, collecting everybody's telephonic metadata, okay, which is a big deal. You know, the Randistas have apoplectic fits about this, okay? There's an issue to do with civil rights there. But it's also stupid from the point of view of national security. When you're looking for a needle in the haystack, don't make the haystack bigger, okay? So it's not just about civil rights versus national security. It's about how do you do national security in a smart fashion. It's not about spending more money and collecting more data doesn't make Americans safer. And the best example of this is profiling. Now, profiling has a dirty connotation. That's a dirty word. It's pejorative. But profiling is actually a synonym for common sense, okay? If you've had 6 banks robbed by a 6'4" blonde guy, why would you look for a 4'2" black lady, right? Why would you harass somebody who doesn't look like them? If 98% of the terrorists come from a certain faith community, have a certain ethnic background, have a certain travel pattern, and visit the same sites on the internet, why are we patting down, 82-year-old Episcopalian grandmothers? How many suicide bombings have we had done by Zoroastrians in the last 15 years? So we've kind of lost the plot here. Yeah, in DC, we tend to polarize these issues into very unsophisticated ways. More Patriot Act will make us safer. No, everything has to be, liberty. Nothing's that simple, yeah? It's like the argument on what you do with the Middle East. Do we do nothing and isolate ourselves and pull down the shutters on the East and West Coast, yeah, as some people would have us do? Or do we invade every country and turn them into America? Well, what if there's something between those two extremes? Yeah? What if there's smart security, helping our Sunni allies, doing things behind the scenes, intelligence support, counter-propaganda? So there is, unfortunately, I'm not trying to cop out, I truly believe this, there is no magic solution. It's a constant give and take. And doing more, gathering more information or spending more money very rarely gets us to a safer place. Yeah.
Dr. Gorka, Sarah Perry, also with FRC. I want to know how pervasive, in your experience, the narrative is that the real threat is right-wing terrorism and not radical Islam. And do you believe this is simple enslavement to political correctness, or is there something else at work? And if so, how do we counter that narrative?
Is this a setup? Checks in the mail. Checks in the mail. 6 weeks ago, I was invited out to the Midwest to brief 300 local law enforcement officers. And the great thing was they gave me 8 hours. I had a whole day. So I gave them everything I do for the guys at Bragg and for the guys at the FBI, the full data dump of what does the jihadi believe, what are their key strategic thinkers, and how do we compete with them. And they seem to love it. I mean, these are the guys on the front line, and I had them in my hand for 8 hours. At the end of the day, we're saying goodbye, shaking hands, and a pretty young girl walks up to me and says, Dr. Gorka, that was very interesting, and clearly you're very intelligent. But I have to disagree with everything you said. Because, and the cops are there, they're still listening, I mean, they're milling around. She actually says in front of them, you have to understand the primary threat to these law enforcement officers is white supremacist militias. That's after 8 hours of information. So I said, really, that's interesting. Who are you? And she gives me her business card. Department of Homeland Security. Right? That's the narrative. So I asked her, okay, let's roll with that. Can you give me a white supremacist, white militia event as significant of San Bernardino or Boston? She pauses, 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 and then goes, Oklahoma City bombing. How about something less than 21 years ago? Right? But this is the narrative. And I can't answer your deeper question. You asked me what is the root of that. The root of that, I don't think there's some deep conspiracy. This is the zeitgeist. This is the world view of the pretty young things hired by the administration. It's the worldview of the people in the NSC. I mean, again, if you don't have faith, I learned this very early on. I worked for 6 years in the Defense Department. About 2 years into the war, I realized I don't care what you are. I don't care whether you're a Buddhist, a Taoist, a Hindu, but if you don't have faith of any kind, you will not understand this war. You just will not understand it. And our administration is peopled by individuals who have no faith, or it's a very Freudian, interpretation of faith. And as a result, it just does not compute. They cannot believe or understand how an individual could get in front of a camera and for 7 minutes sever another human being's head from their shoulders in the name of their creator. They have to explain that away as a function of deprivation, lack of education, their daddy didn't hug them, whatever else, right? Because they don't have religion, they can't understand how somebody does it for religious causes. It is an absolute, it's an epistemological inability to understand the nature of the enemy. Let's go, the gentleman in the gray shirt has been waiting. And we've got, I think,
Thank
time.
you, Dr. Gorka.
Yep.
Yeah, my name is Ken Dante, and I do interfaith dialogue work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to maintain bridges to people. One of my reflections over the years on religious violence is that a lot of it is apocalyptic.
Yes.
And it's a kind of mindset where you bring the new world by destroying the old world. It gives you a carrying card and a permission to do it. When I look at what happened in Orlando, I see someone who did have psychological problems. I worked as a therapist, but it's like he cleans up his motivation by pulling this religious purification. It's almost like he does the sacrament, and the violence becomes sacramental. Recently, I heard a description of some of the recruiting for ISIS, especially the younger people, as girls, guns, God, and glory. And it's a mixture of those. And I think of young people who do not, as you said, have a rooting or an expectation in life or a story that has some deeper energy in it. And so it is very attractive to go on a crusade. Now, this is the great question. Given that there's violence in every religion, there are crusades, and we could just go back through history and do that. How do we reach out to the Muslim community here without alienating them? And I also understand that you have to call things what they are. But how do you walk that delicate balance? My fear is that a lot of the Muslims that I know over the years, I've known all types, but
Can
many of
you
them,
crunch it down, please? So
yes,
other
I'm
people
going to
can
crunch
ask
it
the
down.
question? Yeah.
People who are moderate, if they are alienated further, become extreme. We do have allies and good people and Americans. How do we maintain that hold?
Right. Well, first things first, I'd like to use your preamble to your question to address an issue. All religions have violent histories. Yeah, that may be. But the Crusades cannot be justified by the New Testament. I'd like to make that very clear. Whatever was done in the name of the church cannot be justified through the example of our Savior crucifying himself for us. Okay? Now read the Quran, please. It's a lot different. So the moral relativism amongst religions, you have to know your religions better. How do you alienate? How do you stop the alienation of American Muslims? There's a very interesting statistic. If you look at the median wage of Americans, if you take 330 million people and look at the exact median wage, it's about 5 years ago, but the proportions still stay the same. The median wage in America was $39,000 for all Americans. If you do the same median calculation for Muslim Americans, just Muslims, what do you find? $49,000. Now, isn't that interesting? The average Muslim American is $10,000 more successful than his Christian, atheist, Hindu neighbor. Now, what does that mean? Well, I can't crawl into every Muslim soul and tell you, but to me it indicates something. That the average American Muslim is here. Why? Because they believe in the American dream. Why? Because they're 10 grand more successful at it than their neighbor. Yeah? They're the doctor, the realtor, what have you. So for me, it really whatever you do to reach out to them, it has to be based upon that message. That why are you here? What do you believe in? And the bottom line for me, the metric is always the same thing. The constitutional values of the Republic. I don't care if you're a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, or a Buddhist, or a Muslim. Do you share the values of the Constitution? Because if you're a member of the KKK, you don't. If you're a communist, you don't. If you're a jihadi, you don't. So that's the point of intersection. That's how we rally together and reach out to these people. They believe in the American dream. Well, let's make sure the American dream is still safe and successful. Okay, I think we've got lots of questions. Last question maybe from the gentleman in the red shirt.
Yeah, two quick ones. First, you accused the Council of American Islamic Relations, CAIR, of, I quote, trying to subvert American culture. That's quite an accusation, so could you elaborate on exactly how they're doing that? And second, after both San Bernardino and Orlando, Donald Trump said that the American Muslim community at large, the mosques, the imams, are sort of conspiring to withhold information from law enforcement, are shielding would-be terrorists' identities from the authorities. Mm-hmm. Is there any truth to that, or is that a conspiracy theory?
Who are you and who do you work for?
Alex Emmons with The Intercept.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be glad to. So recently, a U.S. subject was arrested and convicted on the testimony of an undercover FBI asset of being a member of ISIS, of being a terrorist. This happened in California. As the trial was underway, and the individual was clearly going to go away for terrorism charges, CARE in Los Angeles distributed leaflets in the local community where this man lived, demanding that the Muslims of that community uncover the identity of the undercover asset and make it known. I think that's evidence enough. CARE is not on the right side of this issue. If we're putting terrorists in prison for endangering America, why would CARE want to uncover the identity of the person who helped put that terrorist in prison? Time for any more questions? Okay, wrap up. Oh, last question. The gentleman in the back's been waiting.
Yeah, real quick, if you could put a percentage figure sort of on the numbers in the Muslim community in America who you think are sympathetic to this sort of ideology, I mean, what would you say? And the last part of the question also is, I know you had consulted a little bit with Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Do you feel like he gets the scope of this problem and that he really understands what's going on?
Yeah, the first question is impossible to answer. Anybody who can tell you who's sympathetic to, Salafi jihad in America is lying, okay? They don't have that figure. I think most American Muslims are patriots. Yeah, we have them serving in the armed forces. I've trained members of the FBI who are Muslims. Anybody who has, sees a jihadi under the bed everywhere, that person has issues. Mr. Trump, yeah, I was pulled in by Mr. Trump on a couple of occasions last year to give him some advice on national security. Does he get it? Impossible to tell. This man is a very successful businessman, and he has a very steep learning curve when it comes to national security. About 2 months ago, he appointed his National Security Foreign Policy Cabinet. It has members of whom I'm very familiar. Walid Faris is a world-class expert on the Middle East, on jihadi terrorism, so that gives me hope. The issue is how much can he absorb or digest, and how much is he going to rely upon those individuals in the foreseeable future? I don't know. But I know he actually is no fan of political correctness. He knows we are at war, and he wants to win. And my golly gosh, isn't that a refreshing attitude? On that note, I'd like to say thank you, sir.